Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Maestros Musings series. I'm Rosemary Thomson. I'm the music director and conductor of your Okanagan Symphony Orchestra. And for this particular part of the series, we are interviewing composers and performers from our upcoming CD release, Canadian Soundscapes. I'm so thrilled today to be with Imant Raminsh. Imant needs really no introduction in the Okanagan Valley. He is such an extraordinary musician and leader in this community. Imant moved to Canada as a child from Latvia. He was born in Latvia, studied in Ontario, but made his way to the West as a young man, and he's been a resident of Coldstream for decades now. He played for over 30 years as the principal second violin of the Okanagan Symphony Orchestra. He was the founder and conductor for, I think, 4 decades of Ora Chamber Choir before he stepped down fairly recently. He also founded a number of other musical groups across BC, and he founded the Youth Symphony of the Okanagan, which, when he stepped down after 20 years with that group, came under the umbrella of the Okanagan Symphony and is now known as the Okanagan Symphony Youth Orchestra. Imant started a composition program for students that is thriving. He has had such an amazing impact on generations of musicians as a teacher, as a composer. He's a deep well of musical knowledge. And I'll just share a little anecdote. My first guest conducting concert with the symphony in 1999, so that's going back a ways. Imant was preparing the chorus for Messiah, which I was conducting, and I had just moved back to Ontario a few months before the concert, and was living with my husband at his mother's house for about a month as we got our new digs prepared. She is a choral conductor in Ontario, and I came home one day, and she was in awe and said to me, "Imant Raminsh left a voicemail on my answering machine." And because his extraordinary music has made such an impact, Imant's had his works performed literally all over the world. Many times we've performed his works with the Okanagan Symphony, and he has been distinguished with many awards, including the Order of the 3 Stars, which is the big national award in his home country of Latvia, and more recently, the Order of Canada in his other home country, to recognize his incredible contribution to this country and to art and to music. Welcome, Imant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So Imant's concerto, his violin concerto, is it's a monumental piece. It is 3 movements. I think it's just shy of 40 minutes, about a 35-minute piece, which is really extraordinary with incredible developments. And so I just would love you to start by telling us what the impetus was for composing this violin concerto. You're a violinist yourself, of course.
Well, yes. I was approached by Robert Davidovich, who at the time he was the concertmaster of the Vancouver Symphony, and he had previously performed my aria for violin and piano, or there's also an orchestrated version. So he actually we got to talking about that, and he said, would you be interested in writing a violin concerto? And I said, well, I'd have to give it some thought, because the concept of a concerto can vary a lot. There are different kinds of concertos. There are concertos such as I use Paganini as an example, and maybe it's not fair to him, but his concertos tend to be a lot of flash and smoke and fireworks, but not an awful lot of music. And on the other hand, there are composers like Brahms who write basically a symphony with a very important solo violin part. So there's a whole gamut in between those, and I said, well, I'm not really a thunder and lightning type of composer. That doesn't interest me, but I would give it a try. But I'll tell you, there were a lot of sleepless nights. Lots of cold sweats, thinking, my Lord, violin concertos. You know how many composers have only ever written one? Tchaikovsky wrote one. Beethoven wrote one.
All right.
Brahms wrote one.
And why do you think that is?
Because it's hard work. I know there are others who wrote many. Vivaldi, he wrote the same. Oops, I shouldn't say that. But
yeah.
He wrote many concertos. some people say he wrote the same concerto many times, but of course that's not true.
Well, but there is that challenge of, I mean, because people expect there to be a virtuosic element and to really shine the spotlight on the soloist and show off their abilities. And there is that fine line between having that as an element of that piece, but as you say, really having the substance, the musical formal structure and the symphonic elements that make it work. And I think you've just done such a great job with this. It is such a meaty piece that you've created.
Well, I remember that after the premiere, Robert Davidovich was questioned about the work, and he said, "Well, it really tested him to the limit." So,
yeah.
so I know that there are many kinds of concertos. There are student concertos and concertinos, and which are really basically pedagogic works.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're writing a serious concerto, the soloist, I think, wants to feel that he or she has had a challenge and has come through that challenge, and not that I write anything difficult for difficulty's sake, but because I don't think there's any merit in that. And I know that there are concertos which are really difficult to play, but you never really appreciate it. It's just they're just awkward. But I think a concerto that is well written for the instrument can sound difficult without necessarily being impossible. So there are a lot of challenges in doing that kind of work.
I'm thinking that most composers who have written really successful violin concertos at least have some ability to play the instrument. Would you think that's the case? I mean, you've been a violinist your whole life, so there must be things that you didn't even have to think about were idiomatic to the instrument that helps with what you're talking about. You know how to push it and where to make it challenging but not impossible or not difficult for difficulty's sake.
Right. No, I agree. And there are obviously, if you read these stories about Tchaikovsky's concerto, well, I don't think he really understood the instrument so well. So that's why he had to have a lot of consultations, and the initial performances just didn't work. So, but of course, it's a glorious work in its final version. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that understanding the instrument and knowing how best to make it say what it has to say is an advantage, a very, very large advantage.
I was most familiar first when I learned your music back in university. I was singing your music, especially the choral repertoire. So I knew you much better as a choral composer. But what I love in this concerto is the way that you develop the thematic material and the conversational quality that arises out of that development between the soloist and the orchestra. As an orchestral player, how does that come to bear on your composing for the orchestral part of the concerto, or does it?
Well, I'm not sure. I think when it comes to writing for any kind of instrumental music, whether it's with piano or whatever, I tend to think orchestrally, just because I've had so many years of experience playing the orchestral repertoire and conducting and so on. So that I tend to think in orchestral colors. Now, I think I'm probably a fairly traditional orchestrator. I don't, go overboard with exotic percussion instruments and things like that. But within the realm of the instrumentation that I'm familiar with and comfortable with, I think I do a pretty good job.
I would absolutely. I would think you're being very modest there. I would say much more than a pretty good job. Also, your understanding of the richness of harmony, and you create these colors and sounds in your harmonic language that it has a romantic feel, but it also has your own personal voice to it, and I find it deeply satisfying. The progressions that you choose and the voice leading that you bring it in, it really does give a a fantastic warmth, I think, overall, even in the dramatic sections. It always feels very rich in your harmonic language, which I love. Now, you do introduce a non-orchestral instrument into this piece, and if you could tell us a little bit about that, and what was your inspiration there?
Well, it's the soprano voice with the basically it's a vocalese. It's a no text. Well, the background to that is that that in one of these sleepless nights, I started to hear this conversation, and of course it goes way back to ever since I started studying violin. It was impressed upon me that the violin was the instrument that sounded closest to the human voice, which I'm sure every other instrumentalist says the same thing. So, but nevertheless, this was something that, and I guess there's some truth to it. So I thought, well, why fight it? I'm just going to bring in that voice as this orchestral color. I did not necessarily mean that the singer should stand up center stage and be a soloist, but just basically be an orchestral voice. Although it's hard to kind of damp down the fact that there is an actual human on stage.
Yeah. But the duet aspect of the violin's voice is glorious. It really does. I think it just attunes our ears into the quality of singing that the violin is already giving. It blends so beautifully together that I think it's an incredible addition to the orchestra. In fact, I would love to hear more composers write voice parts vocalized into the orchestra, because then it is treated much more instrumentally, right? When they don't have a text, you do sort of hear them on the same level. Yeah.
I can mention another couple of things about the concerto, which you might find.
Please.
One of the other things that, when the idea of writing a concerto was proposed, I said, well, I've always had a problem with the concept of cadenza, where suddenly the music stops. I mean, sorry, not the music, the orchestra.
The orchestra stops, yeah.
Falls out of the way, and now here's the soloist saying, my opportunity to do whatever the heck I want. And whether in fact it has anything to do with what came before or what comes after. But so I thought, well, I know that there have been successful cadenzas written, but so I thought, what I'm going to do now, this might seem a little different. I'm going to work the cadenza in as an essential part of the overall architecture of the work, so that essentially the work starts with a long introduction, then there's a sort of something of an exposition and a development section, and where you would normally expect the recapitulation of the themes of the exposition to be brought back in. I thought, well, I'll give this to the soloist. It won't necessarily be as long as the exposition, but that way it really does kind of it gives the soloist the opportunity to show off technical skills and so on, but it also performs a real function in terms of the architecture of the whole work.
And that's achieving that balance again, right, of the virtuosity, but this meaningful thematic exploration. And I think that even if you don't understand what those terms are, you'll really feel how beautifully it hangs together as an architecture, so that when the violin cadenza comes in, it's so deeply satisfying to revisit those themes, but with different texture. Like, I think it's very clever. I really think that it should be a model for others to follow. And then what about the second movement? Because it's quite soulful. I mean, I find the whole piece very soulful, but the second movement in particular has some real poignancy to it. Was there any specific inspiration for that, just as a contrast to the first?
Oh, Rosemary, we all have our little secret lives.
Okay.
I'm not referring to anything in particular, but
yeah.
No, it's just a love duet, basically.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not sure.
Well, and I appreciate that, Imant, because I think sometimes what's so beautiful about listening to music, in some ways, especially music that doesn't have text, is that the composer might have had some of their own inspiration, but I think that every listener can color it with their own experience. And sometimes not knowing what your specific inspiration was actually can allow more freedom for people when they're listening to let the music mean something to them that speaks to them in however it does, right? And I think that there's a real freedom and joy in that. So I won't pry. But the love duet, I think, really comes through this, the singer and the violin, and I think all different kinds of love can be expressed in that. In some ways, I feel like there's sisters, or there's familial relationship, not necessarily romantic love, but just a real transcendent kind of quality.
Absolutely. And you know what you say. I mean, it's not my duty is to write the work, to put the little dots on the page. But but if the work has any kind of merit, then it's your duty to let it resonate with your life's experience
Mm-hmm.
in whatever way it can or does. If you don't get anything out of it, well then I haven't written a very good work. But hopefully this somehow causes your molecules to vibrate in your way and brings out, you know, reminds you of the joys and sorrows of your life.
Exactly. And when you're thinking about a work that has a featured soloist plus the orchestra, it's the molecules of all of the performers that come to bear. And then it's also how the listener brings their own personal experience. So that's a great segue, because I did want to take a few minutes before we close to ask you about um, the the relationship to our wonderful soloist. And I am going to be speaking with Melissa as well. She goes by Melissa Williams now, but grew up in the Okanagan as Melissa Wilmot. And I know that you factored in her musical life in such a huge way as a mentor for her in teaching in so many different ways. Um, I know she sang under you and played under you and taught and learned theory and did some violin coaching with you. Um, and there's a great story about that she'll tell us in detail about how familiar she was with your piece. And in many ways, I just can't imagine having done this recording on your concerto with anyone else. And I think Melissa just shone in this work. She's an extraordinary musician and artist and young woman anyway, but I think that there was something so personal about this experience. So if you could just let us know what it was like for you to have Melissa being the soloist featured, and just kind of any other things you want to share about how you've shared musical experiences together before.
Well, yeah, I worked with both Melissa and her sister Sandra from, my goodness, I don't know, she was tiny when I first started.
She sang in that chorus that you prepared for me, and she was 10 and she was with this adult chorus.
You know, I always sensed there was something very special about her. That she had a kind of an inner spark and an inner drive that, you know, even when we had these, I invited students in the youth symphony to write concerto works. She started off with Symphony Number One, or was it? Maybe it was Sonata Number One. Now the thing is, when you number it as number one, that kind of assumes that there will be number two, three, right? So she was a forward-thinking young lady, and of course, I had an opportunity to work with her, for several years, and she really developed into an extraordinary young violinist and musician and just a human being. So it's been very gratifying to me, to really quite humbling to me to know that I was working with somebody who had such incredible potential.
And I know she feels the same way about you. I know she feels that having you as a mentor through those years. And Melissa's not a conventional, never was a conventional kid. And that was what was so special about that spark that you're talking about. Like, she really had an incredible maturity already of what she wanted to do and what she wanted to say. I think her performance of your concerto is extraordinary. I'm just so excited that it's been captured in this format so that we can be sharing it with multitudes. And Melissa, of course, now is playing with the Houston Grand Opera. She has two very young children of her own now, and thrilled that Sandra, her sister, who also grew up studying with you, is still playing with the Okanagan Symphony. So in your section, in the second violin section. So it's there's a legacy here, Imant, that I'm not sure that you maybe really know the impact that you've had on so many people of multiple generations. And so having this shining example, not just of your wonderful composition, but to have had one of your students who has sort of blossomed into this incredible soloist be featured it's very poignant for all of us. I think we were all quite touched. So I imagine you feel the same.
I do, absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share with us about the experience? I know it's been a long time since we recorded it that we're finally releasing. So excited. We would hope to get it out on our 60th anniversary, and then COVID and all of that, but we're so excited that it's coming out on the Centrediscs label, so it will have national distribution, and really thrilled that your piece will be heard across the country. Is there anything that you feel about the release that's finally going to happen?
Well, no, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm very glad that the work will be available and can be shared openly, and so that's wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, Imant, go ahead.
And it's complete form. By the way, you know that the original premiere was shortened by about 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, it was very important to me that we play it as it was written, especially because I know how much thought you put into the architecture of the piece. And so while a cut might work, to pull a phrase out here or there, it really does bump that sort of overall structure. So I'm really glad that we were able to record the whole thing. Yeah. So my guest, Imant Raminsh, so excited to speak with you again. We haven't seen each other for a couple of years, and I've also had so many moments with your music over from being a student to my professional career. We're just delighted to be featuring your violin concerto on our Canadian Soundscapes CD, and I hope that everyone has enjoyed hearing your thoughts about it today. If you have questions that you want to ask, you can forward them on to the symphony. We'll make sure that we get Imant to answer. Looking forward to the release, Imant, and to your other music. I know you're still working on new compositions, so it's always a delight to hear something new. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for listening in, everyone.